Aye, Shepherd's Pie. Greetings from the Philippines. Welcome back to the channel for a coffee and a chat. Going to tell you another story today. It is a story about something that happened quite recently in Dumaguete. It is a very sensitive story, so I am going to change some of the names. Well, I'm going to change all the names. I am not going to name any hospitals or any healthcare providers for obvious legal reasons. Don't want to get in trouble. Certainly don't want to upset anyone because it's still a bit raw. It's very recent, but I think it is a story that needs to be told because it amplifies perfectly the reality of living in the Philippines, and particularly a city like Dumaguete. Anyone who's watched the channel for a while will know I don't go out to shock people. I don't try and be controversial, but I am hoping today's story will shock you because sometimes we need to be shocked. We need to be shaken up. We need to realise that life is not a game. So anyway, I think I have done enough of the prelude here. So what happened? Well, first of all, I did not know the chap. I think I'd seen him around after I'd heard of his passing. I saw some pictures on Facebook and I did recognise him, but I didn't know him myself. However, he was a very popular guy. His passing has upset a lot of people over here, and what I'm going to tell you now is all second hand from people who did know him, and this is what they told me, and I have no reason to doubt it. It's one of those things when so many different people tell you the same story, you can come to the conclusion it's true. So this gentleman had a heart attack quite recently, and an ambulance was called. Came and got him. I think they were relatively prompt in getting there. However, when it arrived, it had no emergency equipment on it. It had nothing. One of my friends referred to it as a meat wagon, which is obviously an exaggeration, but there was nothing in there to treat someone who had had a heart attack. Now, you know, I don't know if the crew was trained in CPR. God, you would like to think they were, but the reality is there was nothing in there in terms of prolonging life, any life-saving equipment, so it would transpire. But anyway, he had a heart attack. They came and got him. When he got in the ambulance, he was conscious, obviously in pain. He had a heart attack. But he still had vital signs. Everything was working. He was in the middle of the heart attack. So they decided to take him to a hospital. I have no idea what the decision process is. You would imagine that the chaps were driving the ambulance know what facilities the hospitals have, or have some way of communicating with the hospitals to let them know that someone is coming. You would like to think so. However, they took him to a hospital. They took him to one of the major hospitals in Dumaguete. And when he got there, the hospital did not have any facilities to deal with someone who has had a heart attack. They could not treat him. So he had gone all the way in this ambulance. You might as well have taken him in a car where they have no equipment to administer, you know, life-prolonging treatment. And they took him to a hospital which did not apparently have the facilities to treat him. So the hospital either turned him away, or the ambulance drivers elected to take him to another hospital. So they took him to another hospital which did have life-saving heart attack equipment, etc. I don't know if it's defibrillators, what they had, but apparently they had it at this hospital. So they took him there. However, when he got to that hospital, they were full. They could not accept him. Don't know if it's the emergency room was full or the hospital was full in general, but either way, the decision was made by the admission staff not to admit him. Now, as I understand it, he had been in the ambulance now at this stage for almost an hour. And they had taken him to a hospital which didn't have facilities, and then they had taken him to a hospital which would not admit him. Why in God's name they didn't call ahead or have any contact, I do not know. Another major hospital in Dumaguete. So they elected to take him to another hospital, I think probably the biggest. So I've got to be careful what I say here now. There are very strict laws on naming and shaming or doing anything in the Philippines. So I've got to keep it vague. I do apologise. They took him to the third hospital and he passed away on the way there. Now, a lot of people are saying if they'd taken him to the first hospital first, he would have survived. There's no way of knowing that. I mean, we don't know. They're not doctors. I'm not doctors. I wasn't there. I don't know the situation. What I do know, or any fool will know, it will not have improved his chances of surviving, taking him to 2 hospitals first, picking him up in a vehicle which has no equipment to treat his condition, and just wasting an hour plus, so I'm led to believe, going from hospital to hospital. But that is what happened. And he lost his life. And, you know, even though I've been living in Southeast Asia for nearly 15 years now, it shocked me. It shocked me on a number of levels. It shocked me on the incompetence. It shocked me on the, you're used to having lack of, you know, this is not a first world country, certainly not Dumaguete in terms of healthcare. My experiences here have been positive. Anecdotally, you hear a lot of bad stories. All I can say is I have been to one of the hospitals in the city. I will name it now because I'm not saying anything bad. I've been to ACE a couple of times. People will know who watch the channel. I went to ACE. I'm still under treatment there from a consultant. And my experiences have always been good. You know, I do not have a negative experience regarding healthcare in the Philippines. And I'm sure there will be a lot of other people like me. But to hear this makes you realise just how lucky I have been. Now, the reason I am saying this, because some people will turn around and say, well, it could happen anywhere. I think it's unlikely to happen to the same extent in a place like Cebu or Manila. I can't know that. But one of the real reasons I'm telling this story is it transpires the guy had a pacemaker. He had had heart attacks before. So, and he was young, he was under 60 when he passed. So it makes you, and I'm not trying to upset us, I'm not trying to upset anyone. I've been as vague as possible. I haven't named anyone. It really isn't my intention to upset anyone out there. But the point is, it got me thinking, because there are lots of people who'll say when it's time to go, when it's this, when it's that, you know, you can't worry about these things. Who knows what the future holds? Well, I am one of those people. You know, I am aware that, I mean, when I lived in Siquijor, when I was happy there the first few months, I was warned then that the hospital there, by nurses who worked there, wasn't great. And if you had an accident, to make sure they took you to Dumaguete. Well, I remember thinking at the time, well, if I have an accident, if I'm unconscious, how the hell will I be able to tell them where I'm going? You know what I mean? But you kind of think, well, if it happens, it happens. You know, I'm not aiming to have an accident, but I might have one. I kind of know that the healthcare here in Dumaguete, anecdotally, is not as good as the healthcare in some of the other cities. But, touch wood, I'm reasonably healthy. Hopefully I'm not going to have a heart attack. I might have an accident, but you could have an accident anywhere. It can be fatal anywhere. And I think a lot of people who live in a place like Dumaguete have that attitude. But I don't have any pre-existing conditions. This fella did, which is why I'm telling the story. Really do think if you have pre-existing conditions, you might want to think long and hard before deciding whether you really want to move to a small provincial town or city. Because this story perfectly demonstrates the dangers that you are basically exposing yourself to if you do have a medical issue. And obviously, if you have a pre-existing condition like this chap, then your chances of having a medical condition or an incident like this, which could potentially result in your fatality, are greatly enhanced. I mean, they really are. So it's all very well. A lot of people, as I say, it's all very well saying when you go, when your time's your time. But you don't know if you're going to feel that way when it actually happens. I mean, who knows what this chap was thinking? Whether he was regretting moving here, what his thoughts were. You know, he may well have decided. I don't know the fella. He may have decided, you know, when my time's up, I know the healthcare is not as good as it is in other places. I'm going to move here anyway. You know, I'm happy here. You know, all is good. You know, I'll take the chances. I don't know if that was his thought process. I'm just saying to you, if you're thinking about moving somewhere like this, you need to think about it. You need to make that decision. You need to be aware that that could be the consequence. I mean, since I've had the channel, quite a few people have said they would like to come here, they would like to go there, but they don't because of their healthcare, because they have pre-existing conditions. They're kind of stuck with limited choices: Davao, Mindanao, Cebu, Manila. And I totally get that now, having heard that story, because I think it was 58. That's no age to go. That really is no age to go. And it would appear it was totally unnecessary, in the sense that had he not moved here, he'd probably got better healthcare. Had the ambulance drivers had more equipment, been more capable, he could have survived. You know, if my auntie was you know, you will never know. I can't think what that expression was that I was about to use then. But it's a shame and it's sad, and it is something I say you really need to think about if you're moving here, because you get a lot of people. You'll get people in the comments. I know I will, and I know where they're coming from, saying if it's your time, your time. I say I tend to think that way. But I had a friend who died in the Philippines many moons ago, and Steve. I might even put a link to his story in the video if I remember in the description. And he came in with very limited funds, and he didn't have any medical insurance, and he had a stroke. And I'm sure in his mind, he probably thought, you know, well, when it's my time, when I've got to go, I'll go. But he didn't go like that. He had a stroke, and he couldn't pay his medical bills, and they kicked him out of the hospital. And it was the time of COVID. We tried to get him repatriated to the UK, but we couldn't because the borders were all closed. Basically, the embassy wasn't interested. Whether they would have been more interested in non-COVID times, I don't know. In all honesty, I know a lot of people are saying your embassy will help you with this and that. My experience of the British Embassy, not my experiences personally, but experience from people I've known throughout the years, is not great. I don't think there's a world where the British Embassy would have paid 80, 90, £100,000 or whatever to fly him back on a private jet. And he couldn't fly on a commercial airline, and he didn't have the funds to. And he died a very slow, unpleasant death with his girlfriend, or his wife actually. The last time I saw him, he was lying on a. It was just like it makes me sad just to think about it. He looked dehydrated. He was lying on this old mattress with a fan on him. He had infections in his legs, which he couldn't afford to get fixed. We tried to help him, but he died shortly afterwards. And the medical, they wouldn't help him. All they said is if it got too bad, they'd amputate his leg. So he had a terrible, incredibly uncomfortable last 3, 4, 5 months of his life. The trouble was we didn't find out about it, or his friends didn't find out about it until it was 4 months after he'd had the stroke. Once we found out about it, he was dead within a couple of weeks. So it was COVID. There was not much we could do about it. But the point I'm saying to you, it's all very well and good saying, yeah, well, if it happens, it happens. But it's not necessarily going to happen like that. It's not necessarily going to happen the way you think. It's not going to be a heart attack and you're gone out the blue and, no regrets. It could be slow. It could be lingering. It could be painful. It could be a lot of things. If that is still your attitude and you still think, well, fuck it, I'll take my chances. Well, fine, that's your choice. You're all big boys, or we're all big boys. You know, if that's what you want to do, fine. Not making any judgments. I'm just saying, going that way is not for me. God bless him. And this was a story that I think needed to be told because I think it explains itself. You know, you've really got to think carefully, long and hard, if you have a pre-existing condition. What is, or a life-threatening pre-existing condition, what is most important to you? Is it important that you live as long as possible? Because if it is, you need to think, you know, it's going to limit the chance where you want to live. If you're just going to say, fuck it, I love Dumagetti, you know, that's the place for me, I'm going to end my days there, then fair play to you. But you do wonder, when you hear a story like this, had he really thought it through? You know, did he make the right decision? Was he happy with that decision? You know, God only knows. But it's a thing, you know, I don't know why this story hit hard with me, so hard. Because, I don't know, it just did for some reason. Maybe it's because I'm getting older. Because you hear all the horror stories. I've heard some terrible stories about healthcare in the Philippines over the years. People have put comments in the channels how they had this complication and that complication, and if they hadn't got back to the States or the UK, they would have been dead. And you think, well, that's shocking, but it hasn't been my experience. But for some reason, this one, I think because I live in here, I think because of being told the story by multiple people that I knew, it really did hit home a lot harder than the other stories have. And it's given me food for thought. It really has given me food for thought. You know, it's another reason why I might have mentioned in the last live. I have been thinking. I said I would never do it, but I have been toying with the idea of maybe building a house. Not yet, but maybe 10 years down the line. I've always said I will not build a house until I can lease the land for 30 years. I'm not sure I'll even do it then. I mean, I probably will at some stage, but it's a long way off. But hearing that story, you're thinking, well, I'm not going to. What happens if I did? It would be to build it, you know, so Ellen had something to come back on. Because the reality is, what stopped me from building a house so far is the fact that I never know where I want to live. I don't know where I'm going to want to live in 5 years, 10 years. But the point is, even if you did in 5 years or 10 years' time decide, right, this is the place for you, if you have a heart attack and you survive it, and you're told that your chance of having another one are very high, and you have to have a pacemaker or something like that fitted, then there goes your plans. Because as I've just explained, living in Dumagetti, if you have got a pre-existing condition, would I imagine, I can't do the statistics, but it would increase your chances, I would suggest, of you're not going to likely to have as positive an outcome as you are in some other places. And I think that is something that weigh on my mind. I do think, I mean, luckily at this stage, I haven't got any pre-existing conditions that I know of, but, you know, 10, 20 years ago, I might have been, well, fuck it, you know, it is what it is. Nowadays, no, I think, right, I want the best outcome. I think I would move to a place with better healthcare. That might focus me to moving back to Thailand or something like that. But anyway, we're further down the line now. I mean, I've kind of gone off the story, but I think you know what I'm talking about. God bless him. As I say, I didn't know him, but that must have been a terrible journey in an ambulance. And as I say, you know, the mind boggles when you think, how could they not communicate with the other hospitals? How could they not? How could he take someone to a place that is not equipped to deal with them? Once that had happened, surely you're contacting all the other hospitals to find out which one's ready, to let them know that you're coming, to be expecting you. Well, apparently not in the Philippines. And it's going to be a bad thing to say. I'm not slating the people over here, but common sense is not so common in the Philippines. I think it's fair to say that. You would hope common sense would apply to medical staff, but then again, maybe I'm being delusional. Why would it apply any more in that walk of life than it does in any other walk of life? But yeah, as I say, I hope I haven't upset anyone. I think this story needed to be told for the reasons I've said. Hope I don't get in trouble with the local medical authorities, get sued for this. Don't know how I can. I haven't named anyone. I haven't named or shamed anywhere in particular. But yeah, this is a story that I promised to say after the last one. Kind of ties into the dementia, chaps. The last video I did when I talked about the guy with dementia who got lost and confused and ended up staying at my friend's house. We're all getting older, and we are generally of a certain age in the Philippines. Vast majority of guys over here are 50 plus, definitely. I'd say the majority is 60 plus. But I, at 54, I'm on the younger side of the general demographic of expats. Not sure enough of us think about our healthcare or prioritise it as seriously as we should. Hell of a lot of guys come over here who are blinded by the Filipinas. They come here for the women, they come here for the cheap living, and they don't necessarily consider strongly enough or put enough emphasis on their healthcare and their contingency planning. And, as I said, we're all big boys. That's what you want to do it. But I would seriously urge you to give serious consideration to your funds if you're going to come here, and to your healthcare, and to your emergency funds, and what you're going to do if the worst happens. Anyway, I've said my piece. I'm not going to lecture you. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash the like button. If you haven't subscribed, it would be fantastic if you did. But whether you do, whether you don't, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, stay safe and be lucky.